I recently came across some videos of a pastor by the name of Dave Bryan who has been saying some outlandish things. For example, he stated that the founder of the Church of Satan, Anton LeVey, was a pioneer of some sort of government program to use astral projection to spy on other nations. For those of you who don't know, astral projection is an antiquated occult term for intentionally creating an out-of-body experience where your consciousness or soul can be separated from your body and therefore can move quite independently. I have to make a distinction now between fact and fiction. Our government really did have a program for psychic spying, and it was called Stargate, among other names. As far as I'm aware, the psychic spying was almost always called remote viewing. However, in none of my research did I find evidence that Anton LeVey had any involvement, so it would be best to use the term pioneer for people that would be more deserving of it in reference to the government use of remote viewing, like Joe McGonigal, Pat Rice, and Ango Swan. There is a difference between remote viewing and astral projection, and Joe McGonigal mentions this in his interview on the YouTube channel Vigilance Elite. Normally, I would use a quote to illustrate this point, but the interview is 6 hours long, and I don't wish to watch it again just to prove a point. Since Dave Bryan's claims seem to have gotten a lot of attention and persuaded a lot of people, I thought I would investigate them. Anton LeVey wrote both the Satanic Bible and Satanic Rituals. For this video, I read them. Just to clarify, I am definitely not a Satanist, and if your core beliefs are sturdy, you could read any book you like without being fearful of being unintentionally converted. If astral projection was indeed a large part of LeVey's life, one would expect that at least one of these books would mention such a thing. However, there was no mention at all of astral projection or any similar terms in these two books. Dave Bryan also claims that the reason that Anton LeVey could get away with human sacrifices is because he had an above top secret clearance from the Pentagon. He also claims that the Pentagon, Department of Defense, and DARPA are dark and satanic. The satanic government claim is quite implausible when you realize that if this was true, there would be a significant amount of evidence that would have eventually come out into the light of day. Likewise, there are a lot of people in Congress that are Christian and have security clearances, so we would not even have to rely on media organizations to hear about such a thing if it was actually happening. Of course, we don't have any evidence that LeVey was actually sacrificing people, because obviously it didn't happen. Dave Bryan claims that the cause and the date of LeVey's death was obstructed as part of a conspiracy. He also says that Michael Aquino took over LeVey's place working for the Department of Defense. These lies are more clever than the other ones because Michael Aquino is actually a specialist in psychological warfare and an officer in the Army. Likewise, LeVey's family members did not immediately publicize the date of LeVey's death, which is why the date on his death certificate is different than the date at which he actually died. This is because Halloween is very significant for Satanists, and they did not want to distract their followers with the news of his death. It is also worth mentioning that Anton LeVey and many of today's Satanists do not believe in a literal entity called Satan like Christians do. The Satanic Bible explicitly tells people not to sacrifice animals, while the Catholic Bible says that you could sacrifice animals for atonement. I mention this because Christians tend to bring up the topic of animal sacrifice as an example of how Satanists are really immoral, without having the awareness to really compare the two belief systems on this point. Regardless, you don't actually need a specific belief system to realize that animal sacrifice is wrong. Dave Bryan claims that the reason that Anton LeVey died is because of the combined prayer of Bryan and some other people. Specifically, he says that they prayed for Anton's silver cord to be cut. What he is talking about is not commonly known. In the occult, the silver cord is what keeps your soul attached to your body when the soul and body are separated due to astral projection. This idea seems to have originally come from a specific verse in the Bible. According to the occult and the Bible, this is a cord that everyone has. However, if you've read a decent amount of the literature about astral projection like I have, you soon realize that this connection between the soul and the body is not always like the Bible describes, and is most likely a symbolic representation of a connection that manifests visually for some people when they astrally project. Since astral projection is an interesting topic to me, I have done a fair amount of research about it. Some Satanists seem to think that you have to use evil forces in order to do astral projection, and some Christians would also agree with that statement and say that astral projection is inherently evil. It's amusing to me that such a point where probably the majority of Satanists and Christians may both agree is an area where they are both wrong. All the evidence that I've seen points to the conclusion that astral projection, or more accurately, out-of-the-body experiences, is something that can happen completely independent of external supernatural forces. It's also interesting to hear that Nicholas Schreck, who was a Satanist at the time, talked disparagingly about rock, just like many fundamentalist Christians at the time would. Naturally, both are entitled to their opinions, just like how I'm entitled to think that Mr. Schreck and fundamentalist Christians who think that rock is the work of the devil are both ignorant. Regardless, there is no moral value to altering your consciousness with astral projection. It is completely outside of the realm of morality. The reason that Christians probably don't understand that is because they are too willing to give things that they don't understand over to the domain of evil. There isn't any Bible verse that says astral projection is immoral, and I believe that Gnostic Christianity actually teaches its followers about astral projection. Neither of these things are definitive evidence of the moral value of an action, as people derive morality from all sorts of belief systems. So if Dave Bryan actually did pray for Anton LeVey to die, that is actually a curse. The first definition of the word curse that Merriam-Webster has is a prayer or invocation for harm or injury to come upon one. I included a couple of Bible verses that talk about how you should bless people who persecute you instead of cursing them, and how you should not repay evil with evil, but instead repay evil with blessing. Cursing people is obviously considered wrong in Christianity. It's a good thing that the cursing part of the story is a fabrication then. However, he is misusing the name of God for his own benefit and bearing false witness, which is arguably much worse because those are 2 of the 10 commandments. Dave Bryan claims that Anton LeVey had at least 4 children. One was allegedly sacrificed. Ray LeVey changed her name and was adopted by Dave Bryan. And Anton's 2 other children were named Xerxes and Xena. In actuality, Anton LeVey had only 3 children. They are Xerxes, Xena, and Satan. So where does this fictionalized Ray LeVey come from? I believe this name comes from an actual woman who was called Ray LeVey. She was born before Anton LeVey, so it's totally impossible for her to be his daughter. I think the only connection that they have is the uncommon last name of LeVey. Obviously, it's also immoral to misuse the name of an actual person for your personal gain. Dave Bryan's story is obviously compelling and interesting, which is why it got so much attention. The message he's sending is that God is real, and that he knows this because he's seen the influence of God personally. However, any message of faith is fundamentally undercut by the fact that the story is complete fiction. I don't believe that he is telling the story just to try to convince people that God exists either. I think that he wants to make money off of the book, that he wrote about these fictional events, and that he's probably enjoying whatever fame that he has now as well. The larger problem is not the pastor who will lie to you with a smile on his face. It's that so many Christians believe the lies without hesitation. In my opinion, this is not a bug, but a feature of the fundamental framework of today's Christianity. Pastors, priests, etc., they all have authority and are supposed to be teaching you, imparting wisdom to the believers. This is the implicit nature of the relationship, and because of this implicit nature, it is very easy for pastors and priests to lead people away from the truth. The value of any teaching can only come from its truth. I found it is only with deep thought and fact-checking that I can try my best to determine what is true. I've seen neither of these things happen at church. Since so many Christians do not understand Satanism or the occult more broadly, it's extremely easy for priests and pastors to lie to Christians about this topic. Obviously, the reason that most Christians do not know about the occult is because they've been told by their priests and pastors that it's inherently evil. Satanists tend to be immediately dismissed by most people as fringe characters and as caricatures of evil, so I would conclude that their ideas have relatively little negative impact on Christianity as we know it. I would argue that most mentions of Satanism in the media drive people that are on the fence about Christianity closer towards Christianity, What really undermines Christianity are not external factors like other belief systems, but internal factors. It is because of these internal problems that people leave Christianity and in certain cases become Satanists.